My name's Mike, I'm 32, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. Well, I used to live there with my wife. More on that train wreck later. I'm your typical IT guy during the day, systems administrator at a mid-sized tech company where I keep servers running and fix problems that somehow always happen at 3 in the morning. Nothing glamorous, but pays the bills and keeps my brain busy. The real interesting part of my life was supposed to be the side hustle I had going with my buddy Jason. We started this software company together about 4 years ago, creating management systems for auto repair shops. Sounds boring as hell, right? Wrong. Turns out, small business owners will pay good money for software that actually works and doesn't make them want to throw their computers out the window. Here's where it gets interesting, though. While Jason was running around playing CEO and schmoozing clients at fancy restaurants, I was the one actually building everything. The infrastructure, the code, the whole technical backbone that made our little company worth something. I put up most of the initial cash too, about $40,000 from my savings and a loan against my house. So naturally, when we set up the partnership, I made sure the paperwork reflected reality. I owned 60% of the company. Jason had 25% for being the face of the operation, and we gave 15% to an early investor who helped us get our first big client. Jason didn't love the arrangement, but he knew who was really making everything work. My wife, Kate, seemed proud of what we were building. At least, that's what I thought at the time. We'd been married 3 years, together for 6 total. She worked in marketing for a local nonprofit, made decent money, and we had this comfortable middle-class life going. Nothing flashy, but we could afford nice dinners, weekend trips to the mountains, and we were even talking about buying a bigger house. Kate always said she loved how dedicated I was to our business. She'd bring me coffee when I was working late in my home office, ask about new features we were developing, even help brainstorm marketing ideas. Looking back, I realized she was probably gathering intel, but at the time it felt like she genuinely cared about our success. Jason was around the house a lot, because that's where I had my development set up. My home office was basically mission control for the whole operation. Kate would chat with him while I was deep in code, make him coffee, laugh at his jokes. I thought it was nice that my wife and business partner got along so well. Shows you how naive I was. The first crack in my perfect little world appeared on a Tuesday evening in October. I'd been at the main job later than usual, dealing with a server migration that went sideways. Came home around 8:30 expecting to find Kate watching her reality TV shows and complaining about her day. Instead, I walked into a scene that made my stomach drop. 2 coffee mugs on the kitchen table, still warm. One had Kate's favorite lipstick mark on the rim. The other was clean, but I recognized it as the mug she always gave to guests. Jason's black leather jacket was draped over the back of a dining room chair like he owned the place. The house had this weird energy, you know? Like when you walk into a room and can tell people were just having an intense conversation. The air felt thick, and there was this mix of Kate's perfume and Jason's cologne that hit me like a punch in the gut. I'd smelled that combination before, but never really thought about it. Kate appeared from upstairs about 2 minutes after I walked in, hair slightly messed up, cheeks flushed. She claimed she'd been taking a nap, and Jason had stopped by to discuss some client feedback. Said he'd just left through the back door because he got an important phone call and didn't want to disturb her rest. Now, I'm not the most socially aware guy in the world, but I'm not completely stupid either. Jason's car wasn't in the driveway when I pulled up. If he'd just left, where was his car? And why leave his jacket behind if he was in such a hurry? The whole story smelled worse than week-old sushi. I didn't say anything that night. Didn't confront Kate or call Jason. Instead, I did what any good systems administrator would do. I started documenting everything. Took photos of the coffee mugs, the jacket placement, even the timestamp on my phone showing when I got home. If something weird was happening, I wanted evidence, not just suspicions and hurt feelings. That night, lying in bed next to Kate while she scrolled through Instagram, I realized my comfortable little life might be built on a foundation made of lies. The woman next to me felt like a stranger, and my business partner might be playing games I didn't even know existed. But here's the thing about being the quiet, methodical type. When someone underestimates you, it gives you a huge advantage. They never see the storm coming until it's already destroyed everything they thought they had. The next few weeks were like living in some twisted psychological thriller where I was both the detective and the victim. You know that feeling when you're pretty sure something's wrong, but everyone around you acts like everything's perfectly normal? Yeah, that was my life for about 2 months straight. Kate started doing this thing where she'd compliment Jason right in front of me, but in a way that somehow made me feel smaller. She'd say stuff like how Jason was such a natural leader, how he really understood what it took to build something successful. Then she'd look at me with this patronizing smile and add something about how I was good at the technical stuff, but maybe I should let the real business people handle the big decisions. The worst part wasn't even the obvious flirting. It was how they turned it into this weird psychological game where I was supposed to thank them for pointing out my inadequacies. Jason would nod along when Kate talked about my lack of ambition, then pat me on the shoulder, like he was doing me a favor by agreeing with my wife's character assassination. During our business meetings, Jason started questioning every decision I made. Suddenly, my careful approach to spending was being painted as fear and lack of vision. My preference for testing features thoroughly before release became evidence that I was holding the company back. Kate would sit in on these meetings sometimes, supposedly to offer marketing insights, and she'd always side with Jason's more aggressive approach. One evening, Kate made this comment that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. We were at a barbecue with some friends, and someone asked about the business. Kate jumped in before I could answer and said Jason was the real driving force behind our success. She actually said I was lucky to have someone with his entrepreneurial spirit to push me out of my comfort zone. I started paying attention to their online activity because, hey, I'm an IT guy. Digital forensics is basically part of my job description. Nothing creepy or illegal, just observing patterns. They were both online at the same times, often late at night, when Kate claimed to be asleep next to me. Their social media activity had these weird synchronized patterns that seemed way too coincidental. The business trips were another red flag. Kate suddenly had all these work conferences and weekend training sessions that coincided perfectly with Jason's client visits to other cities. She'd come back from these trips talking about new marketing strategies she'd learned, but could never quite explain the details when I asked follow-up questions. Then came the night that changed everything. Kate was in the shower, and her phone was charging on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping. The screen lit up with a notification, and I glanced over out of habit. What I saw made me feel like someone had punched me in the stomach and then set me on fire. The message preview on the lock screen was from a contact labeled simply as J. The message read, "He still has no clue how pathetic he really is. Yesterday, he told me he trusts me completely. If only he knew what I'm doing with his wife." There was a devil emoji at the end that somehow made it even more disgusting. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of her screen before the notification disappeared. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the phone twice. This wasn't just an affair. They were actively mocking me, getting off on how oblivious they thought I was to their betrayal. That's when I started really digging. I found restaurant receipts in Kate's purse from places I'd never been, always for 2 people, always during times when I was supposedly at work or traveling for my day job. The dates matched up perfectly with Jason's calendar of client meetings that I wasn't invited to attend. The most painful discovery came a week later, when Kate left her laptop open while she ran to the grocery store. I know I shouldn't have looked, but at that point, I felt like I was losing my mind. There was an email thread between her and Jason discussing their plans to start a competing business together. They were calling it their fresh start, their chance to build something without being held back by my cautious approach. But the email that really destroyed me was one where Kate wrote about how excited she was to finally be with a real man who understood her ambitions. She said living with me felt like being married to a scared little boy who was afraid to take risks. Jason responded by saying he'd always known she deserved better than a technical support guy who'd never amount to anything significant. They were planning to wait until our current business got bigger, then leverage Jason's CEO position to steal our client base for their new venture. Kate would handle marketing and business development. They'd already started reaching out to potential investors, using our company's success as proof of their abilities while completely erasing my contributions from the story. The psychological manipulation got worse after that. Kate started having these heart-to-heart conversations about how she was worried about my lack of growth as a person. She'd suggest maybe I should consider therapy to work on my confidence issues. Jason began making comments about how some people are just naturally followers, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. The world needed worker bees too. I realized they weren't just having an affair. They were systematically destroying my self-worth while positioning themselves to steal everything I'd built. Every conversation became an opportunity for them to reinforce their narrative that I was the weak link in every situation. They'd even started making jokes about my appearance, my social skills, my inability to network effectively. The breaking point came during a company dinner with potential investors. Kate and Jason spent the entire evening presenting themselves as the power couple behind our success story. I sat there watching my wife flirt with my business partner, while they both acted like I was some kind of technical consultant they'd hired rather than the majority owner of the company. When one investor asked about my role, Jason actually said I was good with computers, but they handled all the real business decisions. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them or make a scene. Instead, I was going to document everything, build an airtight case, and then systematically dismantle the life they thought they were building on the ruins of mine. They want to play games? Fine, but they had no idea who they were really playing against. Kate filed for divorce 4 months after I discovered their little secret operation. But she didn't just file papers and call it a day. Oh no, she had to turn it into a full-blown performance that would make Broadway actors jealous. This woman had clearly been planning her exit strategy for months, and she wanted everyone to know that leaving me was the best decision she'd ever made. She organized what she called a heart-to-heart with our mutual friends at Dave and Sarah's house. I thought we were going over for a normal dinner party, but it turned out to be Kate's carefully orchestrated public relations campaign. She had talking points prepared like she was running for office, complete with examples of my failures as a husband and partner. Kate told everyone that she'd tried for years to inspire me to be more ambitious, but I was content with mediocrity. She painted this picture of herself as this vibrant, growth-oriented woman trapped in a marriage with someone who had no vision for the future. According to her narrative, I was holding her back from achieving her true potential, and she just couldn't sacrifice her dreams anymore. The performance was flawless. I'll give her that. She even managed to squeeze out a few tears when she talked about how hard it was to accept that some people just aren't compatible, no matter how much you love them. She made it sound like leaving me was this noble act of self-preservation rather than cheating on me with my business partner. Jason was there too, of course, playing the role of a supportive friend who just wanted what was best for everyone involved. He kept saying things about how sometimes these situations don't have clear villains, just people who want different things from life. The guy actually had the nerve to put his hand on my shoulder and tell me he hoped we could all remain friends through this difficult transition. Our friends ate it up completely. By the end of the evening, they were practically applauding Kate for having the courage to pursue her happiness. Sarah hugged her and said she admired Kate's strength in making such a difficult decision. Dave shook Jason's hand and thanked him for being such a good friend during this challenging time. I felt like I was watching my life get rewritten in real time. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth, mainly because I didn't fight Kate on anything. She wanted a car? Fine, take it. Half the furniture? Sure, whatever makes this easier. I even agreed to her request for spousal support for 6 months while she got back on her feet. Everyone commented on how mature and reasonable I was being about the whole situation. Kate made sure to tell people how grateful she was that I wasn't being vindictive or trying to make things harder than they already were. She'd say things about how this proved we were just better as friends, and maybe we should have realized that sooner. The subtext was clear. I was a nice guy who just wasn't cut out for the kind of dynamic relationship she needed. The final divorce hearing was like watching someone else's life end. Kate showed up looking absolutely radiant, like she was going to job interview for her dream position. She wore this blue dress that I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years earlier, which felt like a deliberate psychological warfare move. During the proceedings, she was professional but distant, like I was just another item on her to-do list. After the judge signed the papers, Kate actually approached me in the hallway and said she hoped I'd find someone who appreciated my quiet strength. She said she knew I was a good person, just not the right person for her. Then she hugged me, actually hugged me, and whispered that she hoped someday I'd understand that this was better for both of us. Within a week of our divorce being finalized, Kate and Jason went public with their relationship. Not gradually. Mind you, they announced it on social media with professional couple photos that looked like they'd been planned for months. The caption was something about finding love when you least expect it and being grateful for second chances at happiness. The reaction from our social circle was exactly what they'd hoped for. Everyone gushed about what a perfect match they were, how you could just tell they brought out the best in each other. Several people commented about how obvious it was that they belonged together, and wasn't it wonderful that they'd found each other during such a difficult time in their lives. Jason posted this long, heartfelt message about how sometimes life surprises you with unexpected gifts, and how grateful he was to have Kate's support during the challenging period of watching his friend go through a divorce. He actually used the phrase silver lining to describe how their relationship had developed. The man had absolutely zero shame. But here's what nobody knew while they were celebrating the happy couple's new beginning. I've been having regular meetings with a corporate attorney who specialized in partnership disputes and fiduciary duty violations. Turns out, when you document everything and you're the majority shareholder in a company, you have a lot more power than people realize. While Kate and Jason were busy planning their future empire, I was quietly building a legal case that would show exactly how Jason had been using company resources for personal gain. Every dinner he'd charged the corporate credit card while entertaining my wife. Every client meeting where Kate had been presented as a consultant without board approval. Every decision he'd made that prioritized his personal interests over the company's welfare. The partnership agreement we'd signed 4 years earlier had a clause about conflict of interest and breach of fiduciary duty. Jason had been so focused on the day-to-day drama of stealing my wife that he'd completely forgotten about the legal framework that governed our business relationship. That was about to become a very expensive oversight. I also started reaching out to our clients directly, not to badmouth Jason, but to strengthen my relationships with them. Turns out, a lot of them had been working with me longer than they'd been working with him. They valued the technical expertise and reliability I brought to the table. Several mentioned that they'd always wonder why Jason got most of the credit, when I seemed to be the one actually solving their problems. 3 months after the divorce, Kate and Jason were living together in a nice apartment downtown, posting pictures of their romantic dinners and weekend getaways. Kate had started working as a marketing consultant for our company, even though that position had never been formally approved by the board of directors. They looked like they were living their best life, finally free from the dead weight of boring old Mike. What they didn't realize was that their dream life was built on a foundation that was about to crumble. Every day they spent celebrating their victory was another day I spent documenting their violations and building relationships with the people who really mattered to our business. They thought they'd won the game, but they didn't even understand what game we were actually playing. 8 months after my divorce was finalized, I had enough documented evidence of fiduciary breach to fill a small filing cabinet. My attorney was practically giddy when we went through everything I collected. Apparently, Jason had been so confident in his position that he'd gotten incredibly sloppy with covering his tracks. The man had literally used company funds to pay for hotel rooms where he was sleeping with my wife before our divorce. Corporate law is beautiful when you're on the right side of it. As a majority shareholder with 60% ownership, I had veto power over major company decisions. More importantly, I could call for votes of no confidence against executive leadership when there was evidence of misconduct. Jason had been so busy playing house with Kate that he'd forgotten I still controlled the company he thought he was running. I started small, questioning every expense report Jason submitted. Suddenly, those client dinners needed detailed justifications. Business trips required pre-approval from the board, which meant getting my signature. Kate's consulting fees needed to be reviewed and approved through proper channels, rather than just being rubber-stamped by her boyfriend. The beauty of this approach was that everything I was doing was completely legitimate corporate governance. I wasn't being vindictive. I was being responsible with company resources. When Jason complained about the increased oversight, I simply pointed out that as the majority investor, I had a duty to ensure our spending aligned with business objectives. Jason tried to paint me as a bitter ex-husband who couldn't handle seeing him happy, but the numbers didn't lie. Over 6 months, he'd charged more than $12,000 in personal expenses to company accounts. Restaurant bills with Kate before we were divorced. Hotel stays during supposed business trips where no actual business was conducted. Even a weekend at a bed and breakfast that he'd labeled as a client relations expense. The really damaging stuff came when I started reviewing client contracts that Jason had negotiated without my input. Several deals included terms that were significantly less favorable than our standard agreements. When I dug deeper, I discovered that Jason had been offering discounts and extended payment terms to clients who were also potential investors in the competing business he and Kate were planning to launch. My lawyer filed a formal complaint with the board of directors, requesting an investigation into Jason's conduct and a vote on his removal as CEO. The early investor who held 15% of the company was initially reluctant to get involved in what he saw as personal drama, but when I showed him the financial evidence, he quickly understood that this was about my marriage. It was about protecting our investment. Kate tried to play peacemaker when she realized what was happening. She called me multiple times, suggesting we all sit down like adults and work out our differences. She kept saying that business and personal issues should be kept separate, and that destroying the company would hurt everyone involved. The irony was apparently lost on her. During one particularly memorable phone call, Kate actually accused me of letting my ego drive important business decisions. She said I was proving her point about being too emotional and reactive to handle real leadership responsibilities. Then she suggested that maybe Jason should buy out my shares, so I could start fresh somewhere else without all the negative associations. That conversation was when I realized how completely they'd underestimated me. They still saw me as a passive, accommodating guy who let Kate walk all over him during the divorce. They had no idea that I'd been methodically building a case that would leave them with nothing while staying completely within legal boundaries. The board meeting where we voted on Jason's removal was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in November. Jason showed up with a folder full of company performance metrics, ready to defend his leadership based on our revenue growth. He prepared this whole presentation about how personal conflicts shouldn't interfere with business success. What he hadn't prepared for was a forensic accounting report my lawyer had commissioned. Every questionable expense, every conflict of interest, every decision that benefited Jason personally at the company's expense was laid out in black and white. The early investor took one look at the numbers and immediately called for Jason's removal. Kate was waiting in the lobby during the meeting, probably expecting Jason to come out victorious with some story about how he'd put the bitter ex-husband in his place. Instead, Jason emerged looking like he'd been hit by a truck. In less than 2 hours, he'd gone from CEO to unemployed with a potential lawsuit hanging over his head for the misappropriated funds. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Without Jason's income and with Kate's consulting contract terminated, they suddenly couldn't afford their downtown apartment. Kate had to move back in with her parents, which was particularly humiliating for someone who'd spent months bragging about her upgraded lifestyle. Jason tried to find another position in our industry, but word travels fast in tech circles, especially in a mid-sized city like Raleigh. When potential employers called for references and discovered he'd been removed from his previous company for financial misconduct, the interviews tended to end pretty quickly. The competing business they'd been planning never materialized. Turns out, investors aren't particularly interested in funding ventures led by people with recent ethics violations. Kate's marketing expertise suddenly wasn't as valuable when it came attached to someone with a reputation for inappropriate business relationships. Meanwhile, I was busy rebuilding the company with proper oversight and transparent financial practices. Our clients actually appreciated the increased professionalism and attention to detail. Several mentioned that they felt more confident in our stability now that we had clear governance structures in place. The most satisfying part wasn't watching their plans crumble. It was realizing that I'd been right about the business all along. My careful, methodical approach hadn't been holding us back. It had been protecting us from exactly the kind of reckless decisions that Jason would have made if given free rein. Sometimes being the boring, responsible guy is actually a superpower. 6 months after Jason's removal, I received an offer to buy the company for $850,000. A larger firm wanted to acquire our client base and integrate our software into their existing platform. As the majority owner, I had the final say on whether to accept the offer. For the first time in over a year, I was the one holding all the cards, and everyone else was waiting to see what I would decide. I accepted the acquisition offer, and after legal fees, taxes, and settling Jason's outstanding debts to the company, I walked away with about $510,000. Jason's 25% share was significantly reduced by the money he owed for misappropriated expenses and legal costs. The early investor got his fair cut, but Jason ended up with less than $50,000 after everything was settled. The buyer was particularly interested in keeping me on as a technical consultant for the transition period, which added another six-figure payment to my settlement. Apparently, having the guy who actually built everything stick around to explain how it all worked was worth paying extra for. Jason's business development skills, meanwhile, weren't considered essential to the acquisition. Kate's reaction to the sale was absolutely priceless. She called me 3 days after the announcement, crying and accusing me of destroying Jason's life out of spite. She kept saying I'd ruined everything they'd worked for, conveniently forgetting that they'd worked for exactly nothing since most of the actual work had been done by me. What really got to her was that I'd managed to turn their betrayal into a massive financial windfall for myself. She'd left me thinking I was some loser with no ambition, and now I was walking away with more money than either of them would probably see in the next decade. The cognitive dissonance was clearly eating her alive. Jason tried a different approach. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, asking if we could talk man to man about finding a way forward. He actually had the nerve to suggest that we could start fresh, maybe work together on a new project where we'd learn from our past mistakes. He kept talking about how our friendship was more important than business disagreements. I let him finish his whole speech about second chances and moving forward, then asked him one simple question. When exactly had he planned to tell me about sleeping with my wife? His face went completely white, and he started stammering about how complicated the situation had been, how feelings had developed naturally, how they'd never meant to hurt me. That's when I told him the most important thing I'd learned from this entire experience. Trust isn't something you can reboot like a crashed computer. Once the system is corrupted, you don't try to patch it. You wipe everything clean and start over with better security protocols. Here was a security vulnerability that I'd permanently removed from my network. The best part of watching their relationship fall apart was how predictable it became once the external pressure disappeared. When Kate was cheating with Jason, their relationship had the forbidden excitement that made everything feel intense and meaningful. But when they were just two unemployed people struggling to pay rent, the dynamic changed completely. Kate started blaming Jason for not being strategic enough in his approach to removing me from the company. She said a real businessman would have found a way to marginalize me without triggering legal complications. Jason, meanwhile, began pointing out that Kate's demand for a more luxurious lifestyle had pushed him to take risks he wouldn't have considered otherwise. Their social media posts became increasingly passive-aggressive over the following months. Kate would share articles about toxic masculinity and men who can't handle successful women. Jason would post motivational quotes about overcoming obstacles and learning from failure. The subtext of their mutual resentment was visible to anyone paying attention. The final nail in their relationship coffin came when Kate started openly criticizing Jason's job search efforts. She'd apparently expected him to bounce back quickly and land an even better position than the one he'd lost. When months passed without any significant opportunities, she began making comment about his lack of networking skills and professional reputation. They broke up about 18 months after going public with their relationship. Kate sent me a long email afterward, trying to explain her perspective on everything that had happened. She claimed that she'd genuinely fallen out of love with me before anything happened with Jason, and that she'd only stayed married as long as she did because she didn't want to hurt me. The email was this weird mix of apology and justification, like she couldn't decide whether she wanted forgiveness or vindication. She said she realized now that I'd been a good husband in many ways, but that our fundamental incompatibility had made the marriage unsustainable. She also mentioned that what I'd done to Jason was excessive, even if his behavior had been inappropriate. I read the entire email twice, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations aren't worth having, especially when the other person is still trying to rewrite history to make themselves feel better about their choices. Kate had made her decisions based on what she thought would make her happy, and now she was dealing with the consequences. That wasn't my problem anymore. Today, I'm living in Austin, running a successful cybersecurity consulting business that I built from scratch using the money from the acquisition. I work with small and medium-sized companies, helping them protect their systems and data from exactly the kind of internal threats that almost destroyed my previous business. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm also dating a woman named Sarah who works as a nurse practitioner. She values honesty and reliability over flashiness and grand gestures. When I told her about my divorce and the business situation, her response was that anyone who would betray their spouse and business partner probably wasn't someone worth knowing anyway. Sometimes the right person makes everything seem incredibly simple. Jason eventually found work as a senior developer at a medium-sized software company, but his reputation in the local business community never recovered. Last I heard, he was doing decent technical work, but wasn't being considered for any leadership positions. Apparently, once word gets around that you can't be trusted with company resources, people tend to keep you away from important decisions. Kate moved to Charlotte and got a job at a larger marketing firm where nobody knew her history. According to mutual friends, she's doing well professionally, but hasn't been in any serious relationships since Jason. I hope she finds whatever she's looking for, but I'm not particularly invested in her happiness anymore. The most important thing I learned from this whole experience wasn't about business or relationships. It was about the difference between reacting emotionally and responding strategically. When I first discovered their affair, every instinct told me to confront them immediately, to make a scene, to let everyone know what terrible people they were. Instead, I took time to understand the situation completely, documented everything that mattered, and then used the legal and financial tools available to me to protect my interests. I didn't try to destroy them out of revenge. I simply made sure that their actions had appropriate consequences while positioning myself for success. Sometimes people mistake patience for weakness, especially when you're the quiet guy who doesn't make a lot of noise. But there's a huge difference between being passive and being strategic. Kate and Jason learned that lesson the hard way, and honestly, they couldn't have asked for a better teacher than their own greed and stupidity.